The book I chose is Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt by Deborah Hopkinson. I would use this book in the 5th grade language arts class as an introduction to a lesson about slavery and the Underground Railroad. For my before reading activity, I chose the Making Prediction Strategy. I will have students look at the cover of the book and the title. I will have them make a prediction about what they think the book is about. Making predictions will help students better understand the text and start to use text features as they ask questions about the book. It will also help lead into my during reading strategy. While reading Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt, I will be using the Read Aloud, Think Aloud strategy. This strategy will help students make meaning, connect to background knowledge, and ask questions about the book. Before I was even 12 years old, I got sent from North Farm to Home Plantation because they needed another field hand. When I got there, I cried so much they thought I was never going to eat or drink again. I didn't want to leave my mama. I'm going back to her, I whispered every day to young Jack, who worked beside me in the fields. Well, you better start eating all you can, Sweet Clara, he smiled at me. But then his smile was gone. In a low voice, he said, or else you just won't make it. Young Jack helped me believe I'd get back to my mama someday. Truth was, I'd be lost before I got through the fields, them being so big and all, but I didn't give up dreaming. Why do you think the main character is speaking in dialect? Aunt Rachel was raising me now. She wasn't my for real blood aunt, but she did her best to care for me. One night she'd come back from working in the big house, found me lying dead tired on our cabin floor. She shook her head and said, Sweet Clara, you ain't gonna last in the fields. But I got an idea. Aunt Rachel's idea was sewing, and she started teaching me the very next night. It wasn't easy for me to learn, my hands already rough and clumsy from hoeing and weeding the fields, so Aunt Rachel took it real slow. She brought scraps of cloth from the big house and taught me about each one, how it was special and had to be treated in its own way. I liked to piece the scraps together to make pretty patterns of colors, but Aunt Rachel didn't care much about pretty patterns. Now rip out that whole row and do it again, Claire, she'd say. Why I gotta make such tiny stitches? I complained. You're gonna be a real seamstress, that's why. Why do you think Aunt Rachel wants Claire to be a seamstress? Tomorrow you come with me to the big house. I got it all worked out, Aunt Rachel say one day. I was frightened. You ready to sew with me? She went on. Mrs. Daughter Ella getting married come spring, and I told Mrs. I'd be needing help. She look at your work with sharp eyes, Claire, so do it quick and neat like I taught you. The next morning I tried to eat some cornbread, but my insides were all nutted up. I'd never been inside the big house before, or seen white people that close, except the overseer. So from this passage we can tell that Claire is a slave who works on a plantation in the South. The morning sun was streaming in the sewing room, turning everything all sunflower yellow. Aunt Rachel gave me some sheets to hem. Instead of being contrary, the needle did all I wanted, just like it was part of my hand. What do you think contrary means in this sentence? At the end of the day, the missus come in. Let me see your work, Claire, she say. I gave her the sheet. She ran her hands through it real slow. I held my breath, watching. From now on, come here, she say at last. When she left, Aunt Rachel and I looked at each other, about ready to burst. We done it, girls, she cried. Why do you think a seamstress is better than a field hand? Would you rather be a seamstress or a field hand? So I changed from a field hand to a seamstress. Since the sewing room was right off the kitchen, Aunt Rachel and I were near cook and helpers. There was always lots of hustle and bustle and company in the kitchen. I was hearing all kinds of things in new places that I had never heard before. I listened so hard it felt like my ears must be growing right off my head and getting big with listening. One day 2 white men came in to see the master. The drivers went into the kitchen to talk to cook. There had been too many runaways last summer, one of the drivers said. They'd gone around asking all the masters in the country to join the patrollers. Crazy running away, muttered cook as she beat up some batter. Where you going to get to, said Lost in the swamp. Dunno, said the other, but I hear we ain't that far from the Ohio River. Once you get that far, the Underground Railroad will carry you across. That's right, agreed the first. The railroad would get you all the way to Canada. Then you free forever. Cook snorted. If it be as easy as you two let on, more would have gone. One of the men replied in a quiet voice. It'd be easy if you could get a map. What is the Underground Railroad? Walking back from the big house that evening, I asked Aunt Rachel what I'd heard. Where's Canada, and what's the Underground Railroad? See there, Aunt Rachel pointed, that's the North Star. Under that star far up north is Canada. The Underground Railroad is people who've been helping folks get there, secret-like. She looked at me hard. But don't you start thinking about it. You run away and get caught, and you be beaten. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day I asked Cook, those 2 men that was here yesterday, They was talking about a map. What's a map? Just a picture of land, that's all. Whatever's on the ground, a map can have it. What do you think Clara is going to do next? Sunday, I went to my favorite place on Little Hill and looked out at the people's cabins of the fields. I took a stick and started making pictures in the dirt of all I could see. But how could I make a picture of things far away that I couldn't see? And how could I make a map that wouldn't be washed away by the rain? A map that would show the way to freedom. Then one day I was sewing a patch on a pretty blue blanket. The patch looked just like the same shape as the cow pond near the cabins. The little stitches looked like a path that was going all around it. Here it was, a picture that wouldn't wash away. A map! How do you think Clara is going to make a picture in her map of the things far away that she can't see? So I started the quilt. When you sew, no matter how careful you be, little scraps of cloth always be left after you cut out a dress or a pillowcase. So while my ears kept listening, my hands kept sewing, I began to squirrel away at these bits of cloth. What do you think squirrel away means? It's not the same as the animal, so what do you think it means? When we was off work, I went to visit people in the quarters. I started asking what fields was there. Then I started piecing the scraps of cloth with the scraps of things I was learning. And Rachel say, "Sweet Clara, what kind of pattern are you making in that quilt?" "Ain't no pattern I ever seen." "I don't know, Aunt Rachel. I'm just patching it together as I go." She looked at me long, but she just nodded. Why doesn't Clara tell Aunt Rachel about her quilt map? There was a buzzing in the quarters one summer evening. I saw the patrollers and knew someone had run away. It was young Jack. But 5 days later they caught him. The next Sunday I went to see him, and we walked to the top of Little Hill. He didn't smile the way he used to. I took a stick and began to draw in the dirt. I drew a little square for the big house and a line of boxes for the cabins and the corners, and some bigger squares for the fields east of the big house. I drew as much as I'd pieced together. Jack sat beside me, not saying anything, not even looking at first, but then he started seeing what I was doing. I handed him the stick and heard him catch his breath up quick. Then he began to draw. What do you think Clara and Jack are doing? I worked on the quilt a long time. Some months would go by and I wouldn't get any pieces sewn in it. Sometimes I had to wait to get the right kind of cloth. I had blue calico and flowered blue silk for the creeks and rivers, and greens and blue greens for the field, and white sheeting for the road. Missus liked to wear pink a lot too, so the big house and the quarters, and finally the big house at the North Farm, they was all pink. The quilt got bigger and bigger, and if folks knew what I was doing, no one said. But they came by the sewing room to pass the time of day whenever they could. By the way, Claire, the driver might tell me, I heard the master saying yesterday that they didn't want to travel to Morris's place, 'cause it's over 20 miles north of here. Someone would sit eating cook's food and say, so I could hear, word is they're going to plant corn in the 3 west fields on the Verona plantation this year. When the master went out hunting, Cook's husband was our guide. He came back and said, that swamp next to the home plantation is a nasty place. But listen up, Clara, I tell you how I thread my way in and out of there as smooth as your needle on that cloth. So Clara must be making a map of the things she can't see from listening to stories. Then one night the quilt was done. I looked at it, spread out in the dim light of the cabin. Aunt Rachel studied it for the longest time. She touched the stitches lightly, her fingers moving slowly over the last piece I'd added, a hidden boat that would carry us across the Ohio River. Finally they came to rest on the bright star at the top. She tried to make her voice cheery. You always did like to make patterns and pictures, Clara. You get yourself married to young Jack one of these days, and you two will have a real nice quilt to sleep under. Aunt Rachel, I couldn't sleep under this quilt, I answered, softly putting my hand over hers. Wouldn't be restful somehow. Anyway, I think it should stay here. Maybe others can use it. And Rachel sighed. But ain't you gonna need the quilt when where you're going? I kissed her. Don't worry, Aunt Rachel, I got the memory of it in my head. Do you think little Jack and Clara are going to make it to Canada when they run away? It rained hard for 3 days the next week. Me and Jack left home plantation in the dark thunderstorm. The day after, it was too stormy to work in the field, so Jack wasn't missed, and Aunt Rachel told him I was sick. We went far north, following the trail of the Freedom Quilt. All the things people told me about, all the tiny stitches I took, now I could see real things. There was the old tree struck down by lightning, the winding road near the creek, and the hunting path through the swamp. It was like being in a dream you had already dreamed. How would you feel if you were Clara at this moment? Mostly we hid during the day and walked at night. When we got to North Farm, Jack slipped through the darkness to find the cabin my Mama was at. And we got her and found a little sister I didn't even know I had. Mama was so surprised. Sweet Clara, you've grown so big. her eyes just like I remembered, and arms so strong around me. "Mama, I here for you. We go north. We know the way." I was afraid they wouldn't come, but Mama said yes. Young Jack carried my sister Anna, and I held on to Mama's hand. We kept on as fast as we could, skirting farms and towns and making our way through the woods. At last, one clear and dark night, we came to the Ohio River. The river was high, but I remembered the place in the quilt where I'd marked the crossing. We searched the brush all along the bank until at last we found the little boat. "This was hidden here by the folks on the Underground Railroad," I said. The boat carried us across the dark, deep water to the other side. Shivering and hungry and scared, we stood looking ahead. "Which way now?" Jack asked me. I pointed. The North Star was shining clear above us. "Up there, through the woods, north, to Canada." Sometimes I think back to the night we left, when young Jack came to wake me. I can still see Aunt Rachel sitting in her bed. She shook her head before I could say a word. "Before you go, just cover me with your quilt, sweet Clara," she say. "I'm too old to walk and not too old to dream, and maybe I can help others follow the quilt to freedom." What do you think about the Freedom Quilt? Do you think it helped others get to freedom? Aunt Rachel kept her word. The quilt is still there at Home Plantation. People go look at it, even folks from neighboring farms. I know because some of them come and tell me how much they used it to get free. But not all are as lucky as we were, and most never can come. Sometimes I wish we sewed a quilt that would spread over the whole land, and people would just follow the stitches to freedom as easy as taking a Sunday walk. After I finish reading, I will use a connecting text to world strategy. I will hold a discussion and ask students what they thought about the book and the Underground Railroad. Then I will ask them about the Freedom Quilt. For an activity, I will have my students create their own patch of quilt on a colored piece of paper to represent where they live. Then I will put all the patches together to make a class quilt of our town. This will activate and reinforce what they have learned in the book by connecting the text to their world. These three strategies, making predictions, read aloud, think aloud, and connecting text to world, will help students personalize the information, enhance comprehension, and activate learning.